or smiles. So I was very excited. It was shooting in the summer.
In the world of Hollywood, a single word has the power to elevate a performance from passable to unforgettable. Are you going to hurt me? I'm not going to hurt you at all. There's no hurting here, Daniel. These subtle shifts in tone can define a moment, a scene, even a career. Few individuals grasp the magnitude of this nuance better than Martin Scorsese, the legendary filmmaker whose relentless dedication to the craft has shaped the very essence of American film over the last 50 years. Whether navigating the bleak urban despair of Taxi Driver or the extravagant chaos of The Wolf of Wall Street, Scorsese consistently delves into the human condition with unmatched intensity. His films peel back layers of civility, exposing raw instincts and aching desires. "A lot of the stories I put into my movies were rooted in truth," he once admitted, even though many of the people involved were still alive. But behind that masterful lens lies a temperament as fiery as the characters he immortalizes on screen. While he's cultivated legendary artistic relationships with icons like Robert De Niro and Leonardo DiCaprio, not every actor has meshed with his exacting expectations. Several well-respected performers have clashed with his uncompromising style, often finding themselves unwelcome in his creative orbit. Despite their own acclaim, they fell short of the intense metamorphosis Scorsese demands from his cast. These turbulent partnerships reveal more than just artistic differences. They underscore fundamental disagreements about the essence of performance itself. As Scorsese once famously said, "Cinema is a matter of what's in the frame and what's out." And for 6 actors, what remained conspicuously out was his elusive approval, a stamp of artistic acceptance they would never obtain. Their friction with the director not only sparked gossip throughout the industry, but, in some cases, redirected the course of their careers forever. James Caan was one such figure. His raw, electric presence seemed tailor-made for the violent intensity of a Scorsese narrative. At the height of his fame following his iconic portrayal of Sonny Corleone in The Godfather, Caan appeared destined to work with Scorsese on a character-driven drama in the mid-1970s. The planned film, Italian-American, was meant to be a deeply personal exploration of life in New York's Little Italy. There was a danger to Jimmy, Scorsese recalled years later in a rare interview with Film Comment. He had that authenticity I was chasing. But that same authenticity came bundled with ideas, strong ones, about the character that directly contradicted the director's vision. The growing friction peaked during a now infamous rehearsal in which Caan spontaneously altered several lines of dialogue. The move reportedly triggered an explosive outburst from Scorsese, one that members of the crew would later describe as nothing short of volcanic. "He wanted improvisation, but only his version of it," Caan quipped to The New Yorker many years later. "There's creative freedom, and then there's whatever the hell that was." Within weeks, the entire project crumbled. Publicly, Scorsese chalked it up to creative differences, but behind closed doors, he was adamant that Caan was simply impossible to direct. Though both men continued to thrive in the industry, the icy distance between them remained intact for decades. Their brief and fiery encounter became one of Hollywood's great what-might-have-been stories, a glimpse of cinematic potential that burned out before it ever reached the screen. Mark Wahlberg. Then there's Mark Wahlberg, whose experience with Scorsese during the making of The Departed remains one of modern Hollywood's most intriguing instances of artistic misalignment. Cast in the role of the volatile Staff Sergeant Dignam, Wahlberg infused the character with his trademark Boston grit and confrontational energy. At first, it seemed a perfect fit. Scorsese himself acknowledged as much in a Directors Guild interview, stating, "Mark had that real-world toughness and kinetic force I wanted for Dignam." However, problems emerged quickly, particularly regarding the emotional dimensions of the role. Wahlberg pushed back against the layered psychological complexity Scorsese wanted to inject into the character. On set, their disagreements turned increasingly intense, especially during the filming of Dignam's profanity-laced monologues. According to crew accounts, Scorsese would call cut repeatedly, urging Wahlberg to tone things down, seeking a quieter, more introspective portrayal beneath the brash exterior. He just kept saying, "Less, less," when the whole character screamed, "More." One anonymous production assistant shared with Vanity Fair. Ironically, it was Wahlberg who ended up receiving the film's sole acting Oscar nomination, a twist that reportedly left Scorsese both surprised and, according to some, mildly irritated. Despite maintaining polite public relations, their behind-the-scenes tension was well known. In fact, during casting conversations for Shutter Island and The Wolf of Wall Street, Wahlberg's name was deliberately left out of consideration. When asked about it later by a film student at NYU, Scorsese simply said with a knowing smirk, "Sometimes the frame tells you who doesn't belong in it." Julia Roberts. Sometimes an actor may deliver precisely what an audience craves, yet miss the emotional truth the role demands. Such was the case when Julia Roberts briefly crossed paths with Martin Scorsese during early preparations for The Age of Innocence. Their brief interaction exposed a stark contrast between Hollywood's beloved leading lady and one of its most rigorous, exacting directors. Roberts was initially being considered for the role of Countess Ellen Olenska, a part that ultimately went to Michelle Pfeiffer. But she quickly found herself entangled in Scorsese's uncompromising attention to period detail. She had this glow about her that could have been stunning on screen, Scorsese later admitted in a reflective discussion with Film Quarterly. But there was this unmistakably modern aura I couldn't strip away, no matter how hard I tried. The friction between them came to a head during a fitting session when Roberts challenged the necessity of wearing restrictive corsets typical of the era. Scorsese insisted that the physical limitations were essential to the performance, explaining that discomfort was part of the emotional truth he sought. He expected me to perform while barely breathing just to understand the role. Roberts later hinted in a roundtable with The Hollywood Reporter, pointedly avoiding naming him, but clearly referencing the incident. That's what they call method directing, I guess. A particularly strained discussion about the character's European heritage ultimately led Roberts to pull herself from consideration altogether. The fallout became one of those quietly whispered stories in Hollywood, an illustration of how Scorsese's meticulous historical demands could clash with a star's more instinctive acting style. "When I'm making period films," Scorsese told the New York Times, "I need performers who disappear into the past, not ones who drag the past into the present." Ryan O'Neal. In a similarly revealing moment, Ryan O'Neal, known for his magnetic charm on screen, experienced a disastrous audition that became something of a cautionary tale among casting insiders. This occurred in 1978, when Scorsese was still deciding on who would take on the role of Jake LaMotta in Raging Bull, a role that would soon become synonymous with Robert De Niro. O'Neal, then riding a wave of popularity after standout performances in Barry Lyndon and Paper Moon, was briefly on the shortlist. But according to Scorsese's longtime editor Thelma Schoonmaker, who later recounted the event during a Film Heritage retrospective, the meeting was immediately uncomfortable. "He looked at the script like it was written in a foreign language," she recalled. Things went further downhill when O'Neal suggested toning down the film's raw depictions of domestic violence to make LaMotta appear more sympathetic, an idea fundamentally opposed to Scorsese's brutal honesty in storytelling. "If you're concerned about likability, then you're sitting in the wrong chair," Scorsese allegedly snapped before abruptly calling the meeting to an end. Though he never directly confirmed the specifics, O'Neal alluded to the experience in his memoir, writing, "Some filmmakers want rawness at any cost. I've always believed the audience needs a connection, some thread to hold on to." The encounter underscored a larger divide between traditional Hollywood leading men and Scorsese's often bleak, deeply flawed characters. "There's a big difference between movie stars and the kind of actors I look for," Scorsese later said in an interview with American Film. "I need people who are okay with being hated if that's what the role demands." Winona Ryder. Another subtle but telling conflict emerged when Winona Ryder worked under Scorsese's direction in The Age of Innocence, an experience that offered an inside look into the director's painstaking process. Cast as Mae Welland, the character who on the surface appears to be a fragile, innocent bride, but beneath conceals a steel will and calculated intentions, Ryder found herself grappling with how far she could bend her instincts to meet Scorsese's demands. "She had this delicate presence that the camera absolutely loved," Scorsese acknowledged in a retrospective published in Film Comment. "But we disagreed on what Mae was really up to emotionally." Ryder, it seems, leaned into Mae's innocence, while Scorsese wanted her to lean into the veiled manipulation driving her actions. The divergence came to a breaking point during the filming of a crucial engagement party scene inside the opulent van der Luyden estate. According to production designer Dante Ferretti, filming was suspended for nearly 6 hours, while Scorsese coaxed Ryder toward the emotional shading he believed was essential. He'd talk to her softly for 20-30 minutes between each take, Ferretti remembered. She'd come back red-eyed from whatever he was saying, and then he'd call action, and we'd start all over again. The session became infamous on set as an example of Scorsese's relentless pursuit of authenticity, regardless of how emotionally taxing it might be for his actors. While Ryder never publicly criticized the director, insiders recognized the difficulty of their working relationship. It revealed the core tension in Scorsese's approach, his refusal to compromise on character complexity, even when it meant pushing a performer beyond their emotional comfort zone. Tensions behind the scenes became increasingly apparent to members of the production crew, especially during the emotionally charged third act of the film, when May discloses her pregnancy. What initially began as a collaborative filmmaking process gradually evolved into a highly specific artistic pursuit. Martin Scorsese was seeking a meticulous blend of Victorian decorum, layered over an undercurrent of unspoken emotional conflict, a dynamic that proved incredibly difficult to capture. Script supervisor Martha Pinson, in a rare interview with Sight and Sound, remarked that he wanted something exact, a perfect illusion of restraint disguising internal warfare. Meanwhile, Winona Ryder aimed to expose a more fragile and relatable side to May's character, an approach that clashed with Scorsese's interpretation. He felt that such vulnerability diluted the calculating strength embedded in the character. Although Ryder's performance ultimately earned her an Academy Award nomination, the off-screen creative friction was so pronounced that her absence from promotional appearances and the film's commentary track did not go unnoticed. When asked years later about the possibility of working with Ryder again, Scorsese replied with uncharacteristic brevity, "Winona is extraordinary in certain roles, but May Welland required something very specific she couldn't quite embody." The fallout from their clash became all the more evident in hindsight, as Ryder, despite her ongoing prominence in Hollywood, was never again considered for any of Scorsese's subsequent projects. Longtime costume designer Sandy Powell later recalled Scorsese's private reflection. "Sometimes a performance takes such effort to draw out that, no matter how good it looks on screen, you just can't imagine revisiting that process again." Jim Carrey's near collaboration with Martin Scorsese remains one of the most intriguing creative near misses in contemporary Hollywood, an encounter between spontaneous comic brilliance and the rigid control of a cinematic perfectionist that never advanced beyond pre-production. In 1999, at the peak of his critical acclaim following The Truman Show and Man on the Moon, Carrey was in talks to star in Scorsese's long-anticipated Howard Hughes biopic, a version of the story that was originally envisioned as a much darker psychological character study than the film that would later become The Aviator. Intrigued by Carrey's untapped dramatic range, Scorsese considered him for the lead, remarking in Premiere magazine that Jim carries this volcanic energy that could have captured Hughes' genius and unraveling perfectly, but it had to be controlled with surgical precision. Things unraveled during an intense character workshop held in Scorsese's Manhattan office. Production designer Dante Ferretti, present to conceptualize Hughes's evolving environments, witnessed Carrey arrive brimming with improvisational ideas and dramatic physical transformations that spanned Hughes's life stages. Jim's physicality was remarkable, no question, Ferretti later told Film Architecture Quarterly, but the room grew colder the more he deviated from the script. The core divide became painfully clear during a discussion on adherence to dialogue. Scorsese demanded exact delivery and rhythm, while Carrey pushed for space to explore lines freely. "There are two types of brilliance in acting," Scorsese reportedly told producing partner Barbara DeFina afterward. "Jim's is undeniable, but it's incompatible with how I work." The project soon stalled, with Carrey moving on to star in Bruce Almighty, while Scorsese reimagined the Hughes story with Leonardo DiCaprio in the lead. Reflecting on missed opportunities years later during a film studies masterclass at NYU, Scorsese noted, "Some actors operate in a world entirely of their own creation. My films require performers who are willing to lose themselves inside mine." This unfulfilled collaboration remains a compelling reminder of the fragile alchemy between actor and director. how even the most gifted artists can fail to synchronize when creative processes fundamentally clash. Carrey, for his part, seemed at peace with the outcome. In a 2015 interview, he remarked, "Sometimes the greatest blessing is the opportunity you never take, the door that stays shut."